So before we get into the chapter that I chose to teach for this class session, I want to cover everything that we've gone over, just kind of reiterate it because, one quarter is 3 months. So 3 months ago, we had our first class, and that was some time ago. So we have been studying through the book of Matthew. We have been taking a chronological look at the life and the ministry of Jesus. Even though we didn't cover every chapter, we covered pretty much enough, I think, to have a good idea of an overall storyline of the life of Jesus. In chapter 1, we focused on how Jesus was the promised one from the line of Abraham. In chapter 4, we focused on how Jesus dealt with temptation and how he was connected with specific Old Testament people and events. In chapter 8, we focused on how part of the work Jesus came to do after preaching the kingdom of heaven involved healing the sick. In chapter 10, we focused on how Jesus gave his disciples power and authority and the opportunity to preach the kingdom of heaven and to heal people just as Jesus had been doing. In chapter 13, we focused on how Jesus compared the kingdom of heaven to what was already taking place, what was already occurring as a result of the preaching of Jesus and his disciples. In chapter 14, we focused on sort of John the Baptist and how he came to die, and then some other things like Jesus feeding a multitude of people. In chapter 18, we focused on how Jesus responded to the question of status in the kingdom of heaven. In chapter 23, we focused on how Jesus responded to the hypocrisy of the scribes and the Pharisees. Chapter 24, we focused on how Jesus spoke about the signs of the end of times and his second coming. And in chapter 25, we focused on how Jesus addressed his departure from the earth and the necessity for all his followers to be prepared for his second coming. That leaves us with 3 chapters, chapters 26 through 28. I only selected to teach Matthew chapter 27 in this class session, but in order to make better sense of Matthew 27, I want to at least outline Matthew 26. So I'm going to go ahead and read the first couple of verses of Matthew 26. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." So to put, as I've kind of studied through this a little bit, I had to kind of go back, go to chapter 27 and go back in terms of the days to sort of make sense of a timeline of events. So this chapter begins essentially on a Tuesday. Jesus says that he is going to die. Jesus says when and how he is going to die. He says that after 2 days is the Passover, and that's important to determining the timeline of things. After 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Now here I want to highlight how Jesus says when and how he's going to die, and versus the chief priests, how they thought they could determine how and when Jesus was going to die. Jesus being God, knows all things. This was established, this plan for Jesus to come to the earth and to die on the cross for the sins of mankind. This was established before the foundation of the world. Jesus couldn't make this point any clearer to his disciples. At the end of the last class, so the last class was Matthew chapter 25, and we talked about, there were 3 sort of parables or things that Jesus was talking about, 3 examples that Jesus gave of how the kingdom of heaven was likened. So the kingdom of heaven was likened unto the ten virgins who took lamps. 5 were foolish virgins, and 5 were prepared. And there was a parable of the talents, where there's a man that travels to a far country, and he has 3 servants, and he gives one servant 10 talents, one servant 5 talents, and the other 1 talent. Or 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. And 2 of those servants were prepared, and the third one was not prepared. And then he was talking about how there would be people who would take care of the least of, or take care of people who needed clothing, who needed food, water, those types of things, and those who helped them out would be like helping Jesus out. It's kind of weird way of putting it, but anyway, essentially the 3 things that Jesus talked about in the last chapter, in chapter 25, was about being prepared. And at the end of the last class, I was trying to make a comment that when something is repeated in the Bible, when something is repeated, generally it is an important idea. So in chapter 25, Jesus is repeating himself. He's saying that he was alluding to the fact that he is going to leave the earth, and that he needs his disciples to do the work, to continue the work that he started, and that he's going to come back and take the righteous with him to heaven. But here in the first couple verses of chapter 26, Jesus could not have made this point any clearer. So like I said, he alluded to this in the previous couple chapters and at various other times, but now he has made this fact plain as day. And then we see the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders and the high priests. They thought they could determine when and how Jesus was going to die. They said, or in verse 3, beginning, it says, "Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." So they wanted to put Jesus to death, but they wanted it to be sort of on the down low, as we might call it. They didn't want to draw much attention to it. So they were planning to wait until after the Passover, and if that would be the case, then it would have to be at least a week. I want to skip down. I want to get to chapter 27, but I still want to talk about a couple things here in chapter 26. So the first 16 verses of chapter 26, or at least the first couple verses, I don't know about the rest, but were on Tuesday. So to put this into perspective, the first, essentially we could say 16 verses were on a Tuesday. And then verse 17, it says, "Now on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread." So here we see a change of time. So this would be Thursday, and then we'll see this as the story unravels. So in verse 17 and the rest of the chapter is on Thursday. Now on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover. And then he told them what they were to do, and they went and did that. But I want to highlight, just real quick, the Passover. So the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. We see this in a couple places. First in Exodus, where the Passover was an event. It was sort of a response from God to Israel on doing some. Excuse me. The Passover was the final plague from God to Egypt to let Israel go, to leave Egypt. The Passover was, God was going to send a destroyer to kill the firstborn of every household of the Egyptians and even of the Israelites. But God gave instruction to the Israelites on what they were to do to prevent the firstborn from dying. So that's what we read in Exodus chapter 12. I'm going to... And we read of instruction on what they were to do. And so they were to keep a feast. So the Passover, right, God was going to send this destroyer, anyway, it was going to avenge the firstborn of every household, but God instructed the people that they were to take a lamb on the 10th day. This was going to be the first month, their first month. And so on the 10th day, take a lamb and then keep it to the 14th day, and then that evening kill it and essentially eat it, and put its blood on the doorposts and on the lintel. And then from that night to 7 days or 8, depending on how you count it. So from the 14th day to the 21st day is when they were to partake of unleavened bread. They were to get rid of any leaven in their houses and to only eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Numbers 28:16 through 25 also talks about this. But here in Exodus, the Passover is the evening of the 14th of their first month. Israel must eat unleavened bread from the 14th to the 21st day of the month. And in Numbers 28, the 14th of the first month is the Passover, and the 15th of the first month is the first day, I guess full day, of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the Passover is this important time. It's a memorial to the people of Israel, and it's been a feast. It's been something to remember, to remind them of their essentially freedom from slavery in Egypt. So we go back to Matthew chapter 26. Oops. Let's see. So again, the chief priests, scribes, the elders of the people, and the high priest, they wanted to wait to take Jesus, and they didn't want to take him and kill him during the feast, during this time of where they would be remembering the event back in Exodus. I want to skip down a little bit. Let's see. So Jesus is at supper with his disciples. Let's see. So I didn't have it in don't have the verses in my notes.
26.
Okay. Ugh. Yeah, 26. Thank you. So, beginning in verse 26, they were starting eating supper. As they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is the blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And where they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives. But I want to continue the thought of the Passover. So Jesus took bread, and then he took the cup. So Jesus repurposes an old feast. The old Passover was a reminder to Israel of their freedom from slavery in Egypt. It involved the death of a physical lamb. Of course, this lamb had to be a male and without blemish. The blood of the lamb was to be spread on the doorpost and on the lintel. And this was only for Israel, right? Because Israel was enslaved in Egypt, and this was the thing that would sort of get them out of slavery. The new Passover, quote unquote, is a reminder to Christians of their freedom from slavery to sin. It involved the death of the Lamb of God. This lamb, Jesus, was male and without blemish. The blood of the lamb was shed on the cross, and just before the cross, when he was scourged. And then this was for anyone who becomes a Christian. This new Passover that we partake of, the bread that the bread that reminds us of Jesus' body, and the blood that reminds us of his sacrifice. So the rest of chapter 26, I want to get to chapter 27 here. But the rest of chapter 26 is the supper. They go to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus tells them that they'll all leave him when he's taken. Then, Jesus prays in the garden. He prays 3 times that he wouldn't have to deal with this, but he said he acknowledged to God. He acknowledged that God's will be done in this. And as he was talking with his disciples, there was a great multitude of people that were coming to get him and to take him to be tried. And again, this is at night. This actually begins sort of the illegal nature of Jesus' trials. The first part of it being that it was, during the Passover, and it was at night. So they take him and they start trying him in court. Jesus faces the Sanhedrin, and then we see Peter. So when they take Jesus, all the disciples leave, but Peter actually kind of sticks close by. And when Jesus is on trial, Peter is in the courtyard, and then that's where he denies Jesus 3 times. Okay, so now we get into Matthew chapter 27. Does anyone have any comments on anything before we continue? Okay, so Matthew 27. This is the last day of Jesus' human life, and that makes this day Friday. So when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. So the immediate context, of course, as we discussed a little bit, is Matthew 26. The chief priests, elders, and those plotted to take Jesus and to kill him. But I want to note something here about the plot to kill Jesus. Remember back in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus had gone into a synagogue on the Sabbath. He saw a man with a withered hand. He asked the people that were there a question addressing the laws that they observe on the Sabbath. Jesus says it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. He related a sheep to a human, and he was saying if your sheep goes into a ditch or something, and you go and pull it out on the Sabbath, why, he elevated the value of humans and said, are we not of more value than they are? And Jesus then does a good thing on the Sabbath by healing the man with the withered hand. And between what Jesus said and what he did, he basically claimed to have his messianic authority. And that authority, that is authority over the religious leaders, and the leaders did not like that. And so because of what Jesus did, because Jesus did what the Pharisees didn't like, they wanted to put him to death. And so that goes all the way back to Matthew 12. And so here, they are this close. He is going to be put to death very soon. Let's see. The next section. So the next section focuses on Judas, and Judas, he saw what was going on. They took him to be tried and to be put to death. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests, the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests and elders, the chief priests took the silver. So, when hanged himself, but when the chief priests took the silver pieces, they said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, because they are the price of blood. And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. So the first thing I want to note about Judas. As early as Matthew chapter 10, we find out that Judas was going to betray Jesus. Matthew 10 was, again, that was about Jesus. He was sending his disciples to do the work that he had been doing. And there was the list of the 12 disciples. And at the end of that list was Judas. Judas was a man on the inside. He was one of the 12 people who spent lots of time with Jesus and got to know him well. Judas went to the chief priests and got paid to help deliver Jesus to be crucified. Anyway, Luke chapter 22 verse 3 says that Satan entered Judas when he went to the chief priests. John says that Satan entered Judas after he dipped his bread in the dish that Jesus had just dipped in. I read that in John 13, 26 through 27. At supper, Jesus openly says that one of the 12 will betray him. He gives a hint pertaining to who would do such a thing and pronounces a woe to him. We see it in Matthew 26, 20 through 24. Judas asked Jesus if it would be him, and Jesus affirms him. John is the only writer who says that Jesus left from supper. After revealing Judas as betrayer, Jesus tells him, "What you do, do quickly." After that, Judas left. So Judas met up with the multitude and led him to Jesus, as if to lead them in some kind of battle. And then Judas identified Jesus with the kiss of betrayal, Matthew 26, 48 through 49. So here we kind of see how Judas comes about to betray Jesus. And then here in this section in Matthew 27, verses 3 through 8, or 10, that, Judas he perceived that he had been condemned. And he was remorseful. He brought back the 30 pieces of silver. So Judas, it says that he was remorseful. So, let's see, anyway. So did he have a change of heart? So we kind of wonder what this means. Judas was remorseful. Did he truly, was he truly sorrowful for his actions? Well, I want to sort of compare this with Peter, when he was in the courtyard and he denied Jesus 3 times. So Peter, he was so bold to tell Jesus to the face that he would not deny him. But Jesus, obviously, he knew better, and he said that Peter would deny him. And Peter eventually did deny him. And then when he did, the very last phrase in the last verse of Matthew 26, it says that he went out and wept bitterly. So he did have so Peter seemed to be sorrowful for what he did. Wait, did anyone? Okay. So Peter went out and wept. Judas, he it says that he was remorseful, but what he ended up doing was he took his own life. He went and hanged himself. Right. There's also, as far as the potter's field and that field being called the field of blood, Acts chapter 1, I think, has an account of this. Let's see. Let's just begin in verse 15 of Acts 1. And in those days, Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples. Altogether, the number of names was about 120, and said, "Men and brethren, this scripture had to be fulfilled, which the Holy Spirit spoke before by the mouth of David concerning Judas, who became a guide to those who arrested Jesus. For he was numbered with us and obtained a part in this ministry." Now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all its entrails gushed out. And it became known to all those dwelling in Jerusalem. So that field is called in their own tongue Akeldama, which is field of blood. So in Matthew chapter 27, it seems that this was called the field of blood, because of the blood money, essentially that Judas tried to return, and instead of putting it back in the temple, the chief priests they bought the field. And in Acts, it seems that the reason it's called the field of blood is because Judas went and died on it, and he fell and hit.
Well, here's open. Back to whether Judas repented or not, and his attitude. I think he was sorry. I think he realized what he had done, but it wasn't a godly sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible distinguishes between a godly sorrow and just sorrow. When Paul was writing his second letter to the Corinthians, he wrote in chapter 7, verse 9, he says, "Now I rejoice that ye were made sorry, but that ye sorrowed to repentance." And then in the very next verse it says, "For godly sorrow worketh repentance to salvation."
Mm-hmm.
So Judas had a sorrow about him that was not a godly sorrow, and it didn't work to his salvation.
Yeah.
So unlike Peter, we see a stark contrast between those two men.
Right. I had that in my other notes, but I have different notes pulled up. But yeah, so Peter, he seemed to have more of a godly sorrow. When after he denied Jesus, he went out and wept bitterly. And when Judas kind of saw this, it seemed that he was remorseful, but he may not have had the godly sorrow, more like what Peter had. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's see. So let's go down. So Jesus was before the governor, before Pilate. And Pilate asked him if he was the king of the Jews. And Jesus said, "It is as you say," to sort of avoid avoid saying too much on his part. Let's see, he was being accused by the chief priests and elders. He answered nothing. Now, beginning in verse 15, "Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, 'Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?' For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, 'Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him.' But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, 'Which of the two do you want me to release to you?' And they said, 'Barabbas.' And so this kind of continues on, and the crowd prevails, and they let Barabbas out. But the way I kind of picture it is Barabbas is a prisoner, so he's in prison. He's sitting there. He may not, I don't think they can see what's going on. But if there is a chance that prisoners can hear what's going on, Barabbas may be listening to this. And, when they say Barabbas, right, he's like, "Okay, that's me." And And then when they said, let him be crucified, Barabbas may be thinking, okay, I'm going to die now. But then, let's see. But then you can imagine, right? They send Jesus to die, to be crucified, and they go and get Barabbas, and they release him. I can't imagine like what kinds of things he would be thinking, how he'd be feeling about that. But there's some sense, there would have to be some sense maybe of, I don't know, joy or just uncertainty in a way too. Like, am I really being released? Like, I'm not getting killed? But Jesus in this is, again, we see that Jesus is the one who takes the place of, takes the place of somebody who actually was doing wrong. Pilate didn't want to have anything to do with the death of Jesus, so he took water and he washed his hands, and he said, I'm innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. And then we see the multitude responding, his blood be on us and on our children. And so he released Barabbas to them, and he had scourged Jesus and delivered him to be crucified. Now, the scourging is something that I don't always get. I can't always picture it. I don't always think about it. It's not something that we go through. It's not something that we see in today's society. Now, there are cultures. There are still some areas potentially who have the death penalty, and there's some form of there's still some degree of what's the word? So, some cultures, may still have the death penalty, but I don't know if anyone has it like what they had back in the first century. With the Romans, they were not afraid to enact this scourging if they were the ones doing it. And then the next section here. So they take Jesus. They strip him of his clothes. They put a scarlet robe on him. They take a crown of thorns, and this isn't any little bitty thorn. This is more of like an inch or more of a thorn that really. And they take the crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and then they put a reed in his hand, his right hand. They mock him, and then they take the reed and beat the crown into his skull. You can just imagine between the scourging and this, this is what we do. This is one thing we do every week. This is one thing that we try to remember every week when we come together. Of Jesus, the way that Jesus died, and well, just the fact that he died and was crucified, put on the cross. This is what Jesus went through. And he did it for us. He did it for the whole world, past, present, and future. So they led him away to be crucified, and then after, so they put his clothes back on him. They found someone of Cyrene, Simon by name, verse 32, and they compelled him to bear his cross. And then they went to Golgotha. They wanted to try to mock him maybe some more and give him some sour wine. But of course he wouldn't drink it. Anyway, all these things coming together, prophecies are still being fulfilled through Jesus and through his death. When he was born, when he was born, where he was born, where he lived, as growing up, all those things were fulfilled prophecies, and we continue to see prophecies being fulfilled here surrounding his death. Because here in verse 35, he was crucified, and when he was on the cross, they tore his garments, they were casting lots for them, and it says that the prophecy that was fulfilled was, they divided my garments among them, for my clothing they cast lots. Well, thank you for class.